Well, the only good news I can tell you is at least I started my career early enough. I was only 24 when I started at the Journal, 25. So I'm all right on that score. It's a pleasure to be here. How many of you are readers or subscribers to the Wall Street Journal? Well, thank you for helping to pay my salary, which you do. I'm here to do three things. One, to praise Morton and the Leadership Institute. Two, to give you, I think, my lessons from this last election. And three, to point towards the future. First of all, I am indeed honored and proud to be one of Morton's original students. I think he's now up to over 69,000. Whether I was number 2,812 or 2,813, I don't remember. But I do remember the training, and it helped me. In fact, I would say that, together with something I'm going to mention about a meeting I had with Ronald Reagan, probably were very influential in how I learned how to communicate. But you'll be the judge of that soon enough as to whether or not I can. Lessons of this last election. For the conservative movement, I think the lesson should be very clear. The Bible puts it one way. I'll put it another way. The Bible says, put not your faith in princes. And I think that it's important that conservatives always remember that what we're about are principles, that of course we need political leadership to implement those principles. Political leadership is extremely important. It's one of the reasons Morton's Institute exists. But I think too often the conservative movement, in rallying around its political leadership, sometimes loses track or falls astray of those principles. And there is a reason, for example, the Wall Street Journal never formally endorses a presidential candidate. We never have. All right, I'll make one exception. We did make that one mistake once. In 1928, we endorsed the most qualified and most educated person to ever run for president. His name was Herbert Hoover. Mistakes were made. So that taught us a lesson. In our founding editorial in 1889, we explained why we do not endorse formally candidates. And we basically said, quote, politicians properly observed will often disappoint, ideas properly understood seldom will, unquote. And I think those are good words for us today as well. It certainly is true that our political leaders, those who happen to achieve high office, who lead the conservative movement, deserve our support. But it cannot be unqualified support. It cannot be support with blinders. It must be qualified support, and it must be support in direct relationship to their fealty to the principles. And too often during the 8 years of this latest Bush administration, too many of us, and myself included, were not as observant as we should have been to some of the troubling signs that were showing up. Too many of us, at times, practice what I call the principle of our leader right or left. And that's a very dangerous one, because there were some clear warning signals that should have told us what needed to be done. And finally, towards the end, I think some of us did try to intervene, and I think we did achieve something. And that's an important lesson. Here's the lesson. The first warning signal was, I think, the 2003 prescription drug entitlement benefit. This was the greatest expansion of the welfare state since Lyndon Johnson, and we were doing this at a time when all of the entitlement projections were pointing south. And we were already seeing the trustees' report from Medicare saying it was going to go into the red in 2013. And in a very short-term, short-sighted effort to placate seniors before the 2004 election, we passed not only a prescription drug entitlement benefit, but one that effectively gutted the original proposal of all reforms and basically had all carrot and no stick. And to show you what the real danger signal was, when Denny Hastert, the House Speaker, had to hold the vote open for 5 hours to get it passed, literally twisting arms as he went. And I know some members of Congress who literally cried. These are grown men and grown women who cried because of the pressure that was placed under them to pass that bill. That should have been the first warning signal. The second warning signal, I think, related to the war in Iraq. Larry Lindsey was the president's economic advisor. And in an interview with the Wall Street Journal, not in any way critical of the invasion of Iraq. He simply mentioned this is going to be a very expensive proposition. It's going to cost, well, it could be $200 billion. That, by the way, was $700 billion ago. And for that he was fired. And I think that was a very disturbing signal. When someone who works for the President of the United States only goes off message to the extent of saying the obvious, war is expensive, war is going to cost a lot, not just in lives but in dollars, and he's fired for that, I think that sends a chilling signal through the rest of the administration that this administration does not want to hear certain things. Because he said it in public, but they didn't want to hear it even when he said it in private. And this was concomitant with another statement by one of the members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff saying, we're probably going to need more than 135,000 troops in Iraq after the invasion. And they didn't want to hear that either. Now, luckily, the surge is working. And you can tell it worked because Iraq wasn't even mentioned in the mainstream media during this last campaign. But clearly Iraq did a lot of damage to the Bush administration, did a lot of damage to the conservative movement, and frankly made it more difficult for us to prosecute the war on terror on other fronts because we will now be all the more wary of anything our government tells us, anything our government proposes. That was the second warning signal. And too many conservatives, I think, gave the Bush administration a pass. And I think that that was unfortunate because the war is already over in the sense of the original invasion had been over. We were dealing with the occupation and the lockdown. And to criticize an administration during a period in which, yes, American troops are dying, yes, but not in large numbers, to not criticize the administration for the lack of foresight and the lack of planning, I think was unfortunate because ultimately that criticism came from the left and was largely unfair and biased. I think original criticism from the conservatives, especially those conservatives with a military background, would have been more appropriate. In other words, the State Department and Donald Rumsfeld at the Defense Department should have been challenged much earlier and much more sharply on the prosecution of the aftermath of the war. And the last warning signal, I think, was the appointment of Harriet Miers in 2005. And here conservatives did wake up and finally say enough is enough. And I think that was conservatism's finest moment during the Bush administration because it became a groundswell, an uproar of protest from the grassroots. And it changed things. The Bush administration, frankly, backed down. This is one of the most stubborn presidents we ever had, both for good and for ill. But the Bush administration backed down and had to withdraw Harriet Miers' nomination. Would that perhaps had been done a couple more times during this administration. That might be a good future lesson.